Hey, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Clinic Gym Radio. I am your host, Dr. Josh Satterlee, and it's my pleasure today to be joined by Mel Davis. Mel, how's it going?
It's going really good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Now, Mel, you are from RP Strength, which ironically has a very funny Renaissance periodization strength, which, as you said, is kind of tough for people to spell on the old internets. So you go by RP Strength. Yeah. But can you give my listeners a little background onto, what is RP Strength and maybe the origin story?
Absolutely. Yeah. So RP started out as Renaissance periodization, and we quickly realized, as you said, that's hard to spell and hard to say sometimes. So just to make it easier on our clients, we switched to the acronym RP. It was started by a good friend of mine. Some of you guys might be familiar with Dr. Mike Isertel and Nick Shaw. And they just sort of started out making templates for people to lift and nutrition, like doing it for their family. And people had such good results because they were doing very science-based stuff. Dr. Mike has a PhD in sports physiology. That word spread and it quickly grew into an actual company. And we now have coaches who do training and diet for everyone from a mom interested in getting a little bit healthier to like an elite athlete in physique sport. And we started doing a bunch of books and a bunch of educational materials and just sort of branching out as much as we can, trying to help people get fit, but stay happy, not get crazy with it. Unless they want to. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's funny how that does happen with fitness. I mean, it's a weird thing. I was looking through your Instagram posts and at one point you talk about like, you need this balance of things that make you comfortable and things that make you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I always joke, like if you go to the gym, you get the super flexible woman, she goes up to yoga class because she's like, hey, I'm flexible and it works well in this yoga class.
I'm good at this. I feel good.
Yeah. But she probably could use 2 days of lifting a week. And then you get the guy who lifts every day and it's like, hey, have you thought about going to a yoga class? It's like, no way. I like to lift.
I'm not good at that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny how we do that. But the flip side is when you do see those people, I remember back in the day when I was going to a CrossFit box and you see the people where they have those enormous shifts in their health, multifactorial, enormous shifts, and they kind of start hitting those breakthroughs. I always think for women, it's when a woman can do a body weight pull-up, like that is a breakthrough moment.
Oh yeah.
And for guys, I think it's around the 5 pull-up mark with no kipping, no bands, no nothing, just 5 pull-ups, or both like hit a body weight deadlift seems to be like a stepping stone or a keystone.
Pretty solid. Yeah.
When you see that happen and then they just like, their entire wardrobe starts changing, their off days, go from blue jeans to more workout gear. And then, and it even gets to the point where they're like, what should I do over the weekend? And it's, well, I want to work out because that's their, not just, their identity or whatnot, but it's funny how there are those people where they're so drastically different than the 2 years prior. And then there are the same people that stay like, they're only willing to get like, I don't know what it is, half of one standard deviation of discomfort, right? Like don't push it too far either way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as you've seen that, go ahead. Yeah, I would love to get your perspective on that.
Totally. I think that once you get past, there's a certain point and these accomplishments feed your self-efficacy. I think that's when you sort of get the snowball effect of people getting more and more into whatever they're into. It reminds me of a quote, and I don't know who the author is, but I love it because I think it's the process of starting as a noob and then becoming good at something and how good that is for people's self-confidence and happiness. It's make the impossible possible, the possible easy, and the easy elegant. And I love that because you start out at something, it seems impossible to even get the mechanics of a squat right. And then eventually you're doing what seemed impossible. Eventually you're making it look easy. And eventually it's an elegant process where you just keep adding and it's become easy and it just flows. And I think that's a really important part of people's self-efficacy and happiness, and fitness can often provide that. A little bit of a tangent, but.
No, it's great. I was watching, I don't know if you remember that Netflix had this like Tony Robbins documentary called I'm Not Your Guru or something like that. And he brought up an interesting point on there that I think is like a synonym. He says, in everybody's life, they want tradition and they want to hold some things traditional and they want to have new experiences. So for example, at Thanksgiving, it's a very traditional feel, right? You want to go to you want roughly the same people to be at the table. If you've always been at a big table of 20 people, that to you is like, that's Thanksgiving.
Right.
And then you want the traditional things like, hey, we need turkey and vegetables and a potato. But he's like, most people will tolerate a little bit of non-tradition there, a little bit of new idea. But then the flip side of that is, some people go to the same place every year. Hey, my family always meets up at this lake in Minnesota. And then but those same people typically go, oh, I want to go someplace new as well. So we went to Hawaii last year. Let's go to France this year. We went to Costa Rica. Let's go to, Banff. And it's funny how we need those two things in our lives psychologically. And then we also need them in fitness wise. Like you can get so bored and not just, I don't know if it's bored. There is that exciting part of a new exercise program where you achieve a lot of small wins because you're in the land of achievement,
Yeah. And I think part of the distinction between the sort of extremes with what people do are sort of knowledge and ability zones. Like a lot of people are willing to step a little bit outside of their knowledge and ability zone, but making a huge step outside can be too overwhelming and end up pushing people into being hesitant or afraid to make the moves. So I think like sometimes we see that and we don't realize like, what is a little step for one person is a giant step for another person outside of their comfort zone. So that can be sort of the differentiating factor, I think. And people do best when they make what feels to them like little steps, even if it might look like a larger step to other people.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about that because I think what's interesting about the listeners of this program, most of them are chiropractors and physical therapists, and they're seeing people at an inflection point, meaning most of the people they see have pain, and they're like, hey, I want to deal with this injury. And because we're healthcare providers and we have a lot of knowledge around this, we maybe see a pathway where we're like, oh, you're going to be, in super, like a year from now, I'm going to help you get in great shape and your nutrition will be perfect and you'll sleep enough and you'll be fully hydrated and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, except for the part where this is a human being you're dealing with,
Right.
But when we get to that point where we have a person and we really do think that like, say, it's very common to say like, hey, generalized fitness is the best recovery plan for you. When we get to that point, what are some ways that you would recommend we, either questions to ask or methods to use where we don't make that person feel so overwhelmed that they're like, there's no way I could ever climb Mount Everest. And it's like, I'm not asking for Everest. I'm asking for the hill in your town.
In front. Yeah. So I think that's funny. I think that's something that new coaches in particular do a lot. Like I remember when I first started coaching, I was like, I had this wealth of information at my fingertips. Like I knew exactly how many carbs they needed at what moment of the day to make them like an ideal physique athlete. And they needed to train 6 times a week. And like, I could do so much. And I would get so disappointed when I would make this optimal plan and people wouldn't stick to it. And after, experience and like reading and understanding a little more, you realize, well, like, did they even want that level of results? Were they willing to make the trade-offs that I was foisting upon them because it was the absolute optimal plan, right? So I think like the first thing to do is like sit down with your client and figure out what their actual goals are. Like someone might come in, obviously I'm not a PT, but just like guessing, someone might come in and be like, I just want to do the laundry and walk my dog without my neck hurting, Other people might come in and say, like, I want to climb Mount Everest. I want to downhill my mountain bike ride. And right now I can't do laundry. Like, how do I get from here to there? And making sure like you have their actual goals and their willingness to trade off other parts of their life for progress in mind when you're crafting a plan. And it can be hard when you want to give them more, you want them to have more results, but you have to take into consideration like what their personal priorities and trade-off willingness is.
Do you think that that's been an advantage for you guys since most of your clients are not geographically in the same place as you are, right?
Right.
And so I would just guess that at intake you get a maybe I would say a filtered view or a filtered version of that person rather than, you're not living with that person going, and they're saying, I'm going to work out 5 days a week, 2 hours. And you're like, dude, I know you. Like,
right.
we were drinking beer and eating hot wings last night for the 4th night this week. Like,
right. And you suggested we go tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
So 100%. I think that's definitely one of the limitations of digital coaching. It requires a little bit more sort of tweaking of your communication to get people to tell you the truth. Because very often, they want to present to you what they think you'll be impressed with. So I think, at least for me, what's helped a lot is telling my clients some of my own like diet failure stories and ways that I've messed up. Like I did the first diets I ever did before I knew anything. This was actually run by Dr. Mike before he was Dr. Mike. And it was a 4-month awful diet for me to do a physique show that I don't think I even really wanted to do. I'm not sure why I was doing it, but Thanksgiving. So I dieted through the holidays, which I don't usually recommend people do unless they're really hardcore after a sport goal. And my roommate found me sitting on the kitchen floor inside the refrigerator, eating a pumpkin pie with my hands. And I still had like 3 weeks of diet left. I just woke up at like 1 a.m. and I was like, you know what? Pumpkin pie.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So like, I like to bring up stories like that to them so they understand that they don't need to impress me. Like I'm a fallible human too. And just because I'm coaching them doesn't mean that I don't understand like those trade-off limitations or that I don't make my own trade-offs, So I think that can be a helpful factor.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting too, because I wonder, I'm sure because you guys do see that, what would I say, gracious view people sometimes have in themselves. Like one trick I always use when I have somebody coming in, I'll ask, especially with men, this works well. And I'll say, how bad is your back pain? And they're like, oh, it's not too bad. It just bothers me every day. And I always ask, what would your wife tell me if I asked her that same question? They pause and they say, well, she'd tell you it hurts me every time I do anything.
She made me come in here because I complain all the time. Yeah.
Right. Because much like fitness too, when you do have a pain that's just bugging you, you change what you do every day. Like, my back doesn't hurt every day, but I have stopped mowing the lawn, doing laundry, unloading the dishwasher. I don't reorganize the closets. My garage is a mess because I don't want to move anything around. And I haven't vacuumed in 6 months. And it's like, okay, so there's nothing left.
It's not just a little problem. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I in fitness, it's the same thing. When you look at people who are fit, it's interesting that oftentimes the ones that are super fit, that they have so many micro habits that are inherently healthier, whether it's, I remember this woman that I knew and we went to the same, seminar over a weekend and we were both staying on the 6th floor and she refused to take the elevator. She's like, nah, I'm like, you're going to climb 6 stories of stairs every time. She's like, yeah, just, I don't know. Like, cause she said, if it's really that important, I'll go downstairs and come back up, but it helps me figure out what's really important. Like,
right.
You're not going to run down. Let me just grab a quick bag of chips or something. It's like, hey, we're all, but hey, a few of us are going out and we want to hang out and we're talking. It's like, oh, that is a socially worthwhile experience. I shall do it,
Yeah,
definitely. And so it's when we're, again, going back to like getting people better in our healthcare, it's like, yeah, we can treat you in this office, but there is a lot like, can you sleep a little better? Can you eat a little better? Can you do these different smart habits? I know that you wrote a book around sleep habits, right?
It's just around habits in general, just behavior change. Yeah. Actually, I wrote I co-authored a recovery book also that talks a lot about sleep, but the habit book is more a behavior change book.
Yeah. Well, since you dove into sleep, and I know that is a big deal because a lot of us, as we're treating people, if we ask, they are only sleeping 5 to 6 hours a night, and sleep's the only time really, like, especially if you're involving the nervous system, like that's the only real time it recovers.
Yep.
What recommendations do you have around like building those habits specific to sleep or anything really? But I think that's a big thing that gets ignored in clinical care sometimes.
Yeah. It's really sad that it gets ignored too, because it's such a huge factor. And, like you said, recovery and even just adaptation. Let's say you're not trying to recover from anything and you just want your workouts to actually change your body. Guess what? If you don't sleep enough, you don't have the resources to make those adaptations. So your workouts are just kind of a waste of time in some sense. But yeah, in terms of making good sleep habits, having good sleep hygiene is some things you already, people hear a lot, but don't realize how important it really is. Like, get away from the screen, your computer, your phone, 30 to 60 minutes before you're going to go to sleep. Really helps your brain get ready to fall asleep. Make sure that you are
Can we pause real quick? Let's just dive into that one because
sure.
I think that gets discussed all the time. But then I look at myself and all my kids, my friends and everything. And it's like getting away from a screen, it's tough these days. I mean, because it's like, all right, I turned off the TV, but then I started watching YouTube videos on my phone.
Right.
And then, oh, my kids are on their Kindle or they're on their video games. What are some ways to give, not just to tell people put away the screen, but hey, here's an alternative, right?
Yeah. So I think something that helps, that's also another aspect of having a good sleep hygiene, is to have a sort of bedtime routine. And a lot of time you end up taking away time from the screen just by having this routine. Like for me, I take, my vitamins I take at night. I have a cup of tea. I brush my teeth. I take a shower. Like I have a series of things that I do every night before I go to bed. And there's no screen during that time. And then when I get in bed, I have a couple of books that I'm interested in that I never have time to read because the rest of my life is too crazy. And I put them next to the bed. And then if I'm still awake by the time I get in bed, I'll read a few pages from one of those books. Okay. And that just sort of, it steals away time that I might have been looking at a screen and puts me in a good place to go to sleep, both because of that, those rituals, and because I haven't had as much screen time.
Yeah. Okay. So if we can just build that thing that just marks out 30 minutes, we have a big advantage.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. Unless I did see some ad recently. I was flying and there's like a picture of a guy and he has a screen inside the shower. So it's like this screen talking about, watch the news in the shower. And I'm like, God, as if we need another place, Yeah. So, well, that's a good one, because I always find with a lot of people, as you're recovering, the success rate of just removing things is quite low without the ability to add things in.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Replacing a habit is much easier than just eliminating it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, going back to the habits, so screen time and getting to bed, having that routine for sleep. Any other recommendations you have?
Having a pretty set bedtime and wake up time is really helpful. Once your body sort of aligns, if you do something over and over, it starts preparing you for bed. Melatonin is being released and it sort of sets you up for more regular sleep patterns. Not drinking a ton of liquid before bed, so you don't have to get up and go to the bathroom a bunch. The wind down routine that we talked about is super important. Not drinking alcohol or smoking pot before bed is really helpful. A lot of people think those help them fall asleep, and they do help you fall asleep, but they sort of mess with your subsequent sleep cycles, so you don't get as restful of sleep.
So you're not going as deep, but it's occurring earlier.
Yeah. You're just kind of, there's like 4 sleep cycles your brain goes through, and they just get, you don't get long enough in the good ones when you have THC or alcohol in your system when you go to sleep.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I did. I interestingly heard recently a psychologist talking about one of the best markers for somebody who, is they said in hospital or outpatient psych program. So, these people are being monitored and probably some drugs and whatnot helping them out. And they said one of the best markers for improvement is waking up at the same time every day. So within 15 minutes, when they start seeing that stabilize, let's just say at 6 a.m., regardless of if you went to bed at 11 or midnight or 10 or 9, but that 6 a.m. wake up, that is a early marker of success. And the interesting thing was,
nice.
He said, that's a marker that we will have success within the next 6 months. So it's not like it stabilizes in 1 month,
right?
But that's maybe the first, first reliable thing that we're doing for ourselves or something like that.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was fairly, I always love these, the research that comes out and it's like, well, that's completely affordable and easy to implement. Yeah.
But still hard to do sometimes. And I think like the 6-month thing brings up another good point. And that is that when you start trying to develop these habits and sleep 8 hours a night and have the same bedtime and a bedtime routine and the same wake up time, that's not going to happen overnight either. You're going to mess up. You're going to, drink until 11 and pass out and wake up way later than planned. You're going to skip your bedtime routine and watch a YouTube video. Those things are going to happen. But if you can slowly work towards more days being 8 hours of good sleep over time, like that's what you're shooting for. Because a lot of people will try to change and feel like a failure when it's not like instantly on point. So something to keep in mind.
So you have done some physique type training and competitions. Is that right?
I did one and I hated it. I never did it again.
That's like living 9 lives, in one physique competition, as I understand it. So you did that and you've achieved some other pretty big fitness. You have some pretty big, you're a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. How it's very common to talk to a woman on a podcast and she's a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. Oh, wait, no, that's completely rare. How did that go for you? You seem like a pretty motivated individual. How did it go when, no one gets a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu in less than I've never heard anybody getting it less than 5 years. And even that is lightning fast, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How long was the journey for you? And what were some, plateaus and stall points, and
Yeah, for sure.
were there ups and downs?
It was just under 10 years. I'd say the biggest stall point for me was probably while I was in the first couple of years of grad school. I just didn't train very much because I was so busy. And then I think somewhere around purple belt, I had more time and I had a lot of motivation, just
because it was close before. Or just that point in your life. I mean, because you started seeing the sun or the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Something about purple belt, you start to feel like you have a little grasp on mastery. Like you feel like it's like white through blue belt. You just feel like I'm never getting better. Everyone destroys me, Something about purple belt was like, oh, okay, I've got a couple things that I can pull off. And like, I'm starting to feel like I can imagine getting better. And so that was really motivating. And that happened to coincide with my having more time to train. So I just started training tons every day. And that was a fun time.
Was it a 4, 5, 6 day a week pursuit for you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sometimes a few times a day. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. So that, even with that number of high inputs, if we just look at training hours, it still was a 10-year journey.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because obviously you're a motivated individual, but as we're looking for somebody, we're looking at our patients that maybe are dealing with chronic pain that they've dealt with for literally 20 years.
Yeah.
And I often wonder is like, are we just not choosing long enough goals for them? Like, hey, we're going to get you out of this, but long term, let's look at that Everest level goal. And,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
And where were you living at the time you achieved your black belt? Like a major city?
California. Yeah. Orange County.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think it's interesting because I wanted to ask you too, as we talk about habits and all these things, you made a pretty dramatic move up to a very small town, right? In the Pacific Northwest, which is a beautiful area. And I can see why you do that. But as you've done that, and here you are coaching people at the same time, and you obviously have a lot of knowledge, what do you notice are like positive markers of small town living versus large town living? I mean, I live in Las Vegas, and I've lived in small towns myself. In Las Vegas, it's, for example, very strange to me that I never consider the closing time of a business as a reason I would or would not go there. But that happens all the time in the small town USA,
Yeah, there aren't really any businesses in our town. We have to drive a ways to businesses, and there's definitely like not only closing times to consider, but other things like my husband and I going out on a date and like having drinks and Ubering home isn't really a thing anymore because Uber doesn't go out here, and like it's no fun if I want to be a drink. So I
was up in Whitefish, Montana, and we got an Uber, and we had to wait like half an hour, and I was like asking the guy. It's like, man, it seemed like I waited a long time for an Uber. And he goes, and he like pulls up his phone. He looks, goes, oh, that's because Trevor's not working tonight. So it's just me. I was like, the single other Uber driver, and that he wasn't working. I was like, this is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's definitely upsides too for me mentally. Like I have a lot of outdoor hobbies that I'm pursuing. So being out here just makes those super easy. Like I have a mule I'm training, and I can just hop over and train my mule. I like to shoot. We have a range on our property. I can go shoot. I can walk out the door, and in a mile I can be on hiking trails. So for me, the upsides outweigh the downsides of having, less access to food.
Yeah. Do you notice, have you ever looked at the location of your clients with RP, and, do people have more success with establishing, say, good sleep hygiene strategies or good nutrition strategies if they're in a big city or in a smaller town, or it has, no correlation or causation? I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't actually. I've had clients everywhere from like a tiny town in Alaska where she had to like go to an offsite location to get internet and talk to me to, people in New York during COVID. And really, it's an individual basis thing. I think people who have like very stressful jobs and busy social lives tend to struggle the most. And you could argue they have a lot of awesome things going on in their life, and their trade-off has been sleep. So they have to work on that more. People who have very established sort of schedules or jobs that have a very specific schedule tend to be a little better at it just because there's sort of schedule imposed upon their life already. Yeah, I know a lot of lawyers who sort of work their own hours, and they struggle a lot because they can do what they want when they want. So that the schedule's all in their hands, which can make it a little harder.
Interesting. It's almost worse that they have too much time freedom.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It creates an obligation on you to make your own schedule.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, okay. That's fantastic. When you look at people who have had success, so you guys have obviously had clients that have had massive success. I'd love to hear some of the stories that you have and what were the breakthrough moments, So the person who's always struggled to maybe make nutrition a part of their kind of routine or make exercise part of their routine. What have you guys noticed along the way?
Yeah. So I think what I've noticed just anecdotally the most is people who have a really good attitude about their mistakes tend to be more successful. Like the people who are like, send me an email that's like, oh man, I messed up. I had some drinks and then I went and got French fries. Ha ha ha. And they kind of laugh off their mistakes and can take it all in stride. Mm-hmm. They tend to sort of internalize like shame and failure about those mistakes less. And they can just sort of snap out of it and carry on better. So I think like just having a sense of humor about what you're doing and like an understanding that perfection isn't necessary to make progress is one of the most important factors that I've noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me. Like I know periodization is in the name of your company. And I remember reading an article, I think it was by Mike Boyle, and he talked about like, one of the marks of a young coach is this idea of building in periodization. And one of the marks of an experienced coach is realizing that for most people, periodization is a self-driven thing of like, having a week without a birthday party, a happy hour, a reason to go out with your friends, without the holiday season, it goes in a good year, maybe you'll get, 10 of those weeks in your training,
Yeah.
And that's okay. And that's great because he said, do you really want, I don't know if you read Boyle's writing, but he kind of, he's kind of dry in his humor. He said, do you really want to be the person that has a perfect training program and no social life?
Right.
Or is that the person you aspire to be? Because that might not be exactly what you think it's going to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I have had that talk with quite a few female clients because they'll send you their, the picture of what they want to look like. And it'll be this incredibly lean, like buff woman with abs, and you're just like, all right, let's talk about your life. Like, let me explain to you how this woman has to live if she maintains that year round. And you tell me how worth it that is. Or do you want to get maybe halfway to that physique and still have like wine night on Fridays? And very often when we lay out the trade-offs like that to people, they're like, oh, yeah, actually, I like wine night a lot. I just want to be a little bit leaner.
Yeah. It's funny too, because, if you've ever my brother worked in Hollywood when I was in grad school and he would invite me onto set because if nothing else, they serve very good food. He'd be like, hey, come by at 5 because they're going to serve a really good dinner at 6. And I'd be like, oh, okay. And I was totally broke. So that was the best meal I was eating.
Right.
You went through grad school. You remember what it was like.
Oh, yeah.
But I always, when you see like female actresses in person, they are shockingly skinny. It's almost, it gets close to unattractive and like almost, you're like, hey, she doesn't look healthy. Like, let's get an IV in her, but then you see it on the screen and it's smoothed out and it, is way different.
Yeah.
And I always think like with women when they're like, oh, I have this patient and she's like, I need to get to the gym. I'm trying to lose 2 or 3 more % body fat. And I always think like, I wish there was like an anonymous app where, people around you could rate you as like smoking hot and ultra thin. You're already there, like we have objective evidence to say you're already there in everybody else's eyes, but you're seeing yourself, get out of the shower and all that stuff and beating yourself up. It's like, no one here would think that, no one here is saying, I wish you would lose another 3% body fat. They're looking at you.
Some might be saying they want you to gain 2 or 3% more. I have a friend who's an actress in Hollywood, and she told me about a term that I never heard, which is kind of disturbing, called bevy girl, meaning beverages are your main source of calories, and this is how you stay thin. And I was like, that is disturbing that exists, and there's a cute name for it, but okay.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy. And, it's even tougher, I'm sure, like going back to this idea of like small town versus large town is, I wonder how much social media has skewed these conversations that go on in our head. in both ways, because if you're in a small town, you just don't have enough exposure to people. You might be for example, in your town, I would guess that you are the most fit female, for maybe 100 miles around, right?
I might be the youngest female, and I'm 42.
Right. Yeah. And that, so that's cool. But, we don't always interpret ourselves as that, as that successful, or that we don't rank that way. And so when if you're on Instagram, it's like, oh, that's the place I see multiple female, versions. Yeah. But then being able to say like, oh, that's totally skewed, Right.
I've definitely had that conversation with clients before who are quite fit and just, really upset that they're not more fit. And sometimes I'll just say like, let's take this into perspective. Entire world population, you're in the top 5%, if not higher, for fittest people. So take a deep breath, enjoy that. And like, sure, you can work towards more, but don't let it upset you. Don't let it ruin your day that you're, only in the 95th percentile.
Yeah. 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 And context is so important too, because if you go, sure, there are people fitter than you who that's their job. Like you are maintaining a job, or you have a family, or you are, you're in grad school or whatever. It's like when we start adding these qualifiers, you are now working up to half of the 1%,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I remember when I lived in Montana for college, and I was in the Department of Health and Human Services, and our instructor was running this large study, and, the glories of being a lab assistant is like you get to interpret data. And this is back before computers really were the spreadsheet. We had to build a spreadsheet, and it was like, you could hear the computer running the numbers. Right. Kind of thing, Yeah. We're about the same age, so I'm sure you remember this. And the other thing was the mouse had the ball on the bottom of it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Because I kept banging it on banging it on the table. Anyways, I remember there was a study from Eastern Montana, and it was looking just at alcohol consumption. And it was like these families in Eastern Montana. For those listening, Eastern Montana is very unpopulated, big, wide open spaces, not mountainous. It's more like basically plains and the Badlands, but mostly plains. And they're growing tons of, agriculture out there. Anyways, we got this data back, and it was like the average consumption of males between something like the age of 25 and 65 was like 3.7 times higher than the national average, right? And so they're like freaking out and blah, blah, blah. And our instructor who grew up out there said, yeah, but you have to understand context. And this is, for me, was a like breakthrough moment in my college career, because you got to understand context. What are the markers you're using for alcohol consumption? And it was like a number of drinks per hour. So more than one drink per hour would be considered high consumption rate, right? And if you looked at it, like these guys, basically what they were doing is they would get done with work, and right at 5 o'clock, they'd all haul ass over to the local bar, and they'd meet up and they'd pound beers. So you're drinking like 4 beers an hour for 2 or 3 hours. Now, statistically, that's a very high amount of consumption, a very high amount. But the funny thing is, these guys are also up at 5 o'clock, and they're working their ass off, and there's no martini lunches in Eastern Montana. Like there ain't no chance you're just grabbing a beer at lunch.
These people are doing hard physical labor, and
Right. Yeah. And the other thing is, during those 3 hours, it's their version of sharing information. Like, hey, how's your wheat doing? And you're like, I don't know what it is. Something's wrong, or we're seeing a lot of fungus. Oh, really? That's good information. I need to make sure I'm checking for fungus now. Or, all this information exchange.
It's like a social interaction, information exchange, like a lot of other beneficial things are going on.
Right. That just happens to also have a very high consumption of beer. That if you look at what is the standard for high consumption of beer, but then at 7:30 or whatever, they're all back home prepping for the next day, eating a meal with their family. And so the social interaction, the fulfillment level, how many friends do you have? How many really good friends do you have? Those numbers are also off the charts in a good way.
Right.
Then that doesn't ever get discussed. So she said, yeah. So if there is money in the government that can be aimed at reducing alcoholism, we can get a lot of it. But if there's money in the government for increasing your, self-worth or reducing suicide markers, we can't get any of it, because these guys are
doing great.
Yeah. And I realized, it's all about, context and interpretation of data, which was interesting. So I wonder, like in your population with RP strength, is like, just the fact that they contact you? Are they now in the top 30% of healthy individuals just because they have the thought of,
right,
a structured program would make me better?
Yeah, I would say most of the time, most of the clients we encounter are, above average in terms of fitness. We definitely get some that are not. And I don't coach anymore, but when I did, those were some of my favorite because I really liked delving into like, okay, how can we facilitate a lifestyle change for you? Like, I'm not just going to send you a template with macros and a workout plan. Like, let's start working on like your daily habits before we have any like outcome goals set in mind. Let's see if we can get you to like eat veggies and protein at every meal and go to the gym and do whatever you want 2 times a week. Let's just do that. And once that feels easy, we can start to shape it more and start looking eventually at like specific outcome goals. And those are the most satisfying to me.
Yeah. If you don't mind, share a couple more tips, because we get those people all the time that it's like, the reason you have back pain is because you don't move or you're wildly overweight. And it's funny when you were saying like the people that contact you are typically in that higher level of fitness. But if you ask them like, how do you rank, fitness?
They
they're like, I'm horrible. I'm embarrassed.
No context.
Yeah. So
definitely. So I had one client who came to me and he was like, basically my doctor said I need to lose weight. Like, I don't know how, I don't know what to do. Like, he lived in New York and he had a very active social life. He drank a lot. He loved food. He went to like big fancy restaurants all the time. And so with him, I was like, you know what, let's not worry about the food part yet. I just want to get you to the gym a couple times a week and like, just learn some of the equipment. Like, here's a couple lifts to watch videos of, just toy around, walk on the treadmill, check it out, get in the habit 2 times a week, same day, same time, go to the gym, do something. And so then once we got that sort of stable and he felt pretty good about it, we started messing with food a little bit. Like, okay, I want you to eat veggies and protein at every meal. Don't worry about calories, macros, or anything, just veggies and protein at every meal. And that alone, he lost something like 20 pounds across a few months just because he was doing that. And he was just ecstatic, and we hadn't like imposed any very serious plan on him yet. And he was just ecstatic about the changes and just sort of was like very baby steps sort of process where like he felt a bunch of self-efficacy from these little successes. And then we could move on to the next sort of step. And I think for me, what I always recommend first is get the exercise in first, get the training started first, because it's less stressful to add something to your life than to take away your food for most people. And training tends to have, big changes in body composition from not very much when you're a noob. So it can be a really good way to get things started. It
is interesting. Like, diet and exercise, if you break it in, into that simple kind of thing, exercise doesn't hold a candle in efficacy for weight loss, right? Like, right. But it's almost like that's a misleading way of looking at it, because what makes people dealing with patients on the way, if they're just on a diet, like a Weight Watchers or some sort of diet structure, they don't also seem to be changing psychologically as fast. Whereas exercise seems to be that thing. Like, I am achieving this. I am putting in this effort.
Instead of depriving yourself of something, you go and do something and you get a result, which I think is just sort of feeds that self-efficacy more.
Right. But it's funny. Everybody, abs are built in the kitchen. And it's like, but the motivation to do that
lifestyles are built in the gym.
That's a good way of saying it. I like it. Yeah. Lifestyles are built in the gym. Yeah. So it's just interesting how human beings work, and how multifactorial this whole thing is. Like, because we haven't even talked about like, people are going out socially for work. Or if you're a young professional, like that might be the most influential thing you do all week is go out with your senior partners, and tip a few back, and then somehow find the time for some exercise in there as well.
I have actually kind of a funny story about just that for a particular client. She was very high up in this big corporation, and she was apparently the only female, and the rest of the sort of head honchos were these like old dudes who like drank whiskey and smoked cigars. And she felt like to hang, to stay in her position, she had to do that with them, be one of them, have the whiskey, smoke the cigars, but it was stressing her out. And I was like, you know what people in positions of power, respect is conviction and dedication. So why don't you tell them you're, trying to lose some weight, you're working on your health goals, you're not going to drink with them, you'll come out and hang out and like make fun of them if they get sloppy, but you're not drinking with them. And she did it. And she was like, I couldn't believe it. Like within weeks, like 3 of the 6 guys came up to me and asked me like what the program I was doing and got like interested in doing it themselves and stuff. So it can be interesting what we think like people expect us to do or what we perceive our obligations to be when you really just stand up for what you actually want. A lot of times it turns out a lot different than people imagine.
Yeah. And it's all about improving ourselves, and it's just a magnet for everything, right? It's a magnet to ourselves. It's a magnet to those we work with and those we love and et cetera. So I think that's a great message. Sure. So Mel, if people are interested in hooking their clients up with RP Strength, or maybe somebody listening is interested in their program, can you give us an idea of where to go and what are some of the programs, what are the products that we're looking at here?
Yeah, absolutely. So rpstrength.com is our website. We have everything.
So we don't have to spell out Renaissance periodization, strength.com. Okay.
We fixed that. Thank goodness. I sometimes forget how to spell Renaissance. And I shouldn't at this point. Anyway, we have everything from sort of basic do-it-yourself templates for diet and training, from everything from hypertrophy for muscle growth to, specific sport sort of training. Same thing, we have diet templates that range from simple to pretty advanced. We also have a diet app, RP Diet app. We have a bunch of books. We have one-on-one coaching, and almost all of our coaches are both PhDs and athletes. So we have a really, really good team if you want to make the investment and have like a really smart human being on your side. Everyone there is great. I'm
sure they're all of the mindset, PhD and athlete. If you ask them, how much have you achieved in their life? They'll probably say, certainly not enough.
Yeah, not
That's
much,
why I'm looking at the next challenge. Yeah.
But I also have a discount code for your listeners.
That'd be great.
Dr. Mel Podcast, DRMEL PODCAST. And that gives you 20% off of ebooks and templates on the website, or 6 months of the app at $9.99 a month. I think it's usually $15 a month or something like that.
Nice. Okay. So Dr. Mel Podcast, enter that code in when we're looking at stuff and get a 20% discount. I like it.
Yeah.
Now, one thing we talked about early on, you and I, before we hit record, was that all these templates that you guys as a company really work to match the client's goals with the template. And oftentimes people say like, oh, I want let's just say hypertrophy program. And you ask them what they're doing. They're like, oh, I'm training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm trying to get my black belt in Jits, right? And it's like, well, there might be better matches for you. So how does that process go?
Yeah. So if you are looking, training templates, for example, come in a variety of days per week. So you can pick, the 2-day per week or the 6-day, 2 times a day per week or whatever it is, depending on your goals. And just remember, like, if you're working really hard towards another sport, adding a ton of lifting is just going to make you worse at lifting and worse at your other sport. So find one that sort of fits into your schedule. And
don't worry. It'll also probably negatively affect your relationships too.
Right. Yeah.
After a few months of that. Yeah. And make you not that popular work. But besides that, completely, totally normal, totally healthy. Yeah. Yeah. So you guys go through that matching process to work with people.
There's kind of if you have a coach, they'll go through it in a very tedious manner and sort of craft the training to fit your goals and your schedule and your other life stuff. For the templates, you got to have a little self-knowledge kind of. There's, everything from at-home dumbbell and band templates to like a 6-day a week in the gym barbell training intensive program. So you got to pick your poison. And there's a sort of a little quiz on the website that walks you through, like, what are you looking for? What do you need?
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good way of looking at it, is like, not how much can I do, of like, what's the best way to do it, is maybe better. So, well, Mel, it was a pleasure talking with you today. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
Once
this
again,
was fun.
Yeah. And once again, people, if you're looking for Mel and her team, how many coaches are there now?
Ooh, I think around 20.
Wow. And so it's just like, hey, are you in incredible shape? And do you have a PhD? We have a job you can do in addition to the job you're currently doing.
Right.
Like if you hit all those criteria, you'll fit in here. So the people are man, you should, they're well motivated if nothing else, huh?
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Well, as we say on every one of these podcasts, Mel, thank you so much. And we always say, go out there, maximize your license, and live the life you dream of. Thanks so much, Mel.
Nice. Thank you.
Thanks so much for checking out these videos. I hope they're useful. We'll cover things like rehab, exercise, business model, progressions, layout, everything else that helps you build a clinic. So if you're interested, you can click here, there, here, or anywhere to get more videos just like this. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you soon.